That will be the question. All right, let's move into the fall camp rankings. What exactly we're going to get with that? Notre Dame routinely being ranked in the top part of those rankings, but I think just mainly looking at some of the teams that they're jockeying for position for. I know we've talked about this before. Your opinion on Penn State, rather.
Yeah,
I know that you're not as high on them, I think,
I am
as
not.
other teams, or maybe compared to Notre Dame. I didn't know if you had seen any sort of rankings that you wanted to pick on, or if it was specifically that the Penn State and Notre Dame pre-fall camp rankings.
Well, I mean that's a big one for me. So Joel Klatt put out his, and
Yep, that was exactly what I was thinking. I'm sorry,
that's
you can continue, but that's exactly
the first one I saw was Andy Staples, right?
mhm.
He's a pretty big name, and he had Notre Dame up, I believe, at number 2 in his behind Texas, which I'm fine with Texas being up there. You can't. They lost a lot of wide receivers and they lost a lot on their offensive line, and there's going to be some questions about Arch Manning with new receivers and a new line and a first time full time starting quarterback. But he's got some game experience, and Sark's a great play caller, so and their defense should be pretty good. So, I'm fine with Texas. This Penn State thing, though, man, I don't get it. I don't have you're putting a lot on Drew Aller, and you're putting even more on James Franklin, and both of them have proven time and time again to be the anti-clutch. And I don't know how you can keep. It's like Lucy in the football, and Penn State they just keep pulling it. James Franklin keeps pulling the football, landing on their back. I don't know how you can put them one. I can understand Texas. I can understand Ohio State. I guess defending champs or whatever, and I guess I can understand Oregon. I guess, but the Penn State thing gets me, and I've seen somewhere LSU's above Notre Dame, which I think is patently absurd.
Yeah, that's actually wild. I did not see that.
I don't know what I feel about. I mean, you with the LSU thing, they're going to be playing a murderous row schedule, and that I don't think that defense is still fixed, and I don't think you're running through the SEC with an unfixed defense. So I don't understand it. They might end the season probably 8-4, and I wouldn't be surprised. So whatever. But
I think some of it is looking towards the potential and what some of these teams may have. So like maybe not regarding schedules as much whenever we put like post-spring pre-fall camp rankings out. It's more so just like, okay, who do they got on the roster? Who do they have returning? Obviously Penn State has I think they've got, I want to say 15 starters returning, something like that. That's a common thing in a lot of those teams that were ranked pretty high was the amount of returning starters that they had. But I think it's looking towards that. But I would agree with you on the LSU point is just they have a lot of flaws where if I'm actually looking about how this season is going to turn out, I don't really know if I can actually put LSU above them if I'm also ranking it like that. That being Notre Dame, of course.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of it too is there is some apprehension to put Notre Dame up there in some of the polls, and I think one thing I found interesting is that when Andy Staples did his, and he had Indy at 2, there wasn't as much kickback in either I think the Insta or the Twitter post that he made about it. Where a lot of times, if you saw Notre Dame in the top 10, people would be like, Notre Dame's overrated. I saw less of that. I think the playoff was quite the statement. And it's tough to really carry on some of the narratives against Notre Dame when you have the 3 playoff wins, including SEC champion Georgia and the aforementioned Penn State when Riley Leonard couldn't find a pass he didn't want to couldn't find a completion, let's say, in the first half of that Penn State game. So I don't know. I just the Penn State one I take exception with, because how can you be down on Notre Dame and you see this team that year in and year out constantly fails you in Penn State and just never winning any big game or any game of note? You get a pretty easy draw to get to Notre Dame in the college football playoff comparatively, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it was SMU and Boise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was that Kevin Jennings game where he just seemed to have crumbled
I
under the
mean,
lights.
yeah, he just completely folded, just pick after pick, right?
And then for Boise, obviously, just honing in on Ashton Genty, stopping
Ashton,
that, and just play
yeah.
your game. I think Penn State, like in a similar way, I of being a Notre Dame fan, I do want to, recognize, like, yes, both of these teams were kind of paired together over the last 4 or 5 years of just not being able to win that big game. But it is important not to go too crazy and recognize how far Notre Dame got compared to Penn State. These teams played last year,
Yeah,
and I did double check. Penn State returning 14 starters, 9 on offense, 5 on defense. But is it enough to put them higher than Notre Dame? And then also Joel Klatt had them at number 1.
Yeah,
That seems
and
seems
you lost
way too much for me.
You lost Warren, who was the whole offense.
Drew
right?
Allen's going to have to adjust. There are some people calling him Carson Beck, losing Brock Bowers. Like, it's a real thing.
He had 0 completions to a wide receiver in that Notre Dame game.
Yep.
I mean, 0. And it's not like he's got a bunch of 3-star talent. There's 4-star guys on that roster, man. And I know they're not performing up to value. And like Cardinal Tate was on that roster, right? And it's like there's guys there, or not Cardinal Tate. Who's the other Ohio State transfer? He had a former 5-star from Ohio State transfer in there, and like there's guys there, and he's just checking down to his running backs, and he's throwing it to Warren. Warren's throwing passes, and Warren's running the ball. And on defense, like Abdul Carter with like half of a shoulder against Notre Dame was the most disruptive presence the team saw all year. He probably is the best player in in the NFL draft this year, and it's like he's gone. And so the two things that really made your defense and offense, and I know they just got Jim Knowles, right? The defensive coordinator from Ohio State, but like the Knowles system does take some time to get going. So I don't know, man. It's just,
I have like
it feels disrespectful.
I think it is disrespectful. Here's one thing I'll go maybe on the other side for, and you can tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong. I think this quarterback battle needs to be settled, but it needs to be settled the right way. So you weren't going to name a starter, and it really appeared that way as spring went on. In the spring or after the spring game, you were going to take it in the fall and really assess what you got. So that drops you in the rankings. But if you had decided on your guy, whether he was actually the best or not, you just decided to make the decision and you were just going to live with that. And like I said, he could have just not been the best guy, but you have a name on your board or whatever. I definitely think that Notre Dame would have benefited in these fall camp rankings in that regard, because I was looking at the rest of Joel Klatt's top 25 and I had another one pulled up, and the consistent thing that I'm seeing of teams that are above Notre Dame are ones with that quarterback
being named
solidified. Yeah, obviously Oregon's Dante Moore, I believe, and then Cade Klubnik, you've already mentioned him, whatever he could potentially be if he is going to take that next step. And an Arch Manning. And it's like, well, those teams have that quarterback, so I get the feeling of maybe just not, you don't want to roll the dice in your precious top 25 that you have preseason. You want to be right about as many as possible. So you at least like to know who exactly you're banking on. But as I mentioned in my whole soliloquy here, you have to make the right decision if you're Notre Dame. And obviously not basing it off of fall camp rankings. You got to take the time to do it. But without having that person named, it could end up, when we look at some of these things, that could also be a reason why.
That's a great point, because what it shows is it's sort of just big narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So Notre Dame, I mean, we pretty much are all certain it's probably going to be CJ Carr, and everybody's sort of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge on it. But yeah, if they'd named Angeli, then they could write glowing things about Angeli. If they named him.
Playoff hero is
the
back
playoff hero, and bowl MVP, and
and they would have called him a veteran too. They would have called him a veteran, a player with experience,
starts under his belt. Passes
multiple
through
bowl games.
I mean, as experienced as I guess Arch Manning, I guess, but but they didn't, because they want this to play out, because they don't really care. It is true Notre Dame has to be at their best the first 2 games of the year. I think they have to have their best ready to go for the first 2 games, but Notre Dame's got the best running back duo in the country. All the shade to Penn State because we stole your running backs coach who came to Notre Dame. So which room does he think is better? You know, and the offensive line is going to be elite next year. So you got an elite offensive line and an elite running game, and that alleviates a lot of the concerns. You can say the same thing about Penn State, certainly. But, you know, I feel really good about Notre Dame's defense. And, you know, you look at the players coming back, and, you know, Xavier Watts was phenomenal, and he would be greatly missed. But I don't think that's a loss on the level. I don't think any of the defensive losses is on the tier of, you know, Drew Carter. But I don't know. The main part for me is it's just disrespectful because the two teams did just play. And if there was a narrative about which team was more deserving of getting some preseason hype and then not letting you down for said hype, I think Notre Dame might have earned the respect. And that's what all these polls are. All these polls, these top 25 polls at this point in the season, they're not based on anything. They don't have any practice footage. They don't know how good any of these teams are, you know, going to perform next year. Every single poll is merely these are the teams that I respect. So when you see a preseason top 25 poll, you are looking at what the publisher or the author of that poll, how much they respect your team. The higher they are, the lower they are. And Joe Klatt putting Penn State above Notre Dame says that he respects Penn State more than Notre Dame. I mean, that's all it is. And that's where I say I don't think you should respect Penn State more than Notre Dame. I think that is erroneous. And here we are, right? I mean, it's just that's what makes sports fun.
Yeah, that's what makes sports fun. You have a narrative to build into next season, and like we are obviously Notre Dame fans, and we have you know, an ability to talk about Notre Dame here. And Joel Klatt's been accused by many of having biases of his own as far as the Big Ten is concerned. And, and it's just a natural thing when these rankings are, you know, coming out, especially when you haven't actually seen these teams play each other, play football. So it's a normal thing.